The morning sun painted the Denver skyline in muted gold as Sofia Alvarez pulled her aging sedan into the parking lot of the Veterans Wellness Center. The lot was already crowded, a stream of men and women filing toward the building with slow, deliberate steps. Some walked with prosthetic limbs that caught the sunlight. Others carried invisible burdens reflected in their wary glances and stiff postures. Sofia watched them for a moment before switching off the engine. Her hands lingered on the steering wheel, steady but tense. At 28, Sofia often looked younger than she was. Her dark hair was tied neatly back, her navy blazer pressed until not a wrinkle remained. She wanted to appear professional but not distant, approachable but not soft. She had chosen this outfit carefully, hoping it would help her blend into an environment she already knew would be skeptical of her presence. The faint scar running across her left temple, partly hidden by her hair, betrayed more history than she was willing to share. The lobby was alive with movement the moment she entered. Veterans filled every chair, some with hands trembling as they held newspapers, others staring blankly at the television mounted on the wall. The air carried a sterile mixture of disinfectant and stale coffee, underscored by an unspoken tension. It was the kind of atmosphere where every sound felt slightly too loud. Behind the desk, a receptionist juggled ringing phones and impatient voices, her expression hardened by years of repetition. "You must be Alvarez," a voice said behind her. Sofia turned to see a man in his 60s with silver hair and tired but kind eyes. He extended his hand. "Robert Keller. I'll be your supervisor." He offered her a brisk handshake before leading her down a hallway lined with bulletin boards and motivational posters. As they walked, Sofia caught sidelong glances from other staff. Whispers carried in low tones, remarks about her youth, her inexperience, how rookies never last long. Robert noticed. "Don't let it bother you," he said. "We've had a line of new counselors come in here thinking they'll change the world. Most don't last a month." He stopped at a small office already marked with her name on a temporary placard. Inside sat a desk, 2 chairs, and a narrow window looking out to the lot. "Your first case files are on the desk," Robert said. "Some tough ones to start with. If you can handle them, you can handle anything." Sofia nodded, though a knot tightened in her chest. She had barely begun arranging a photo of her family on the shelf when a shrill alarm pierced the building. The fire alarm. Through the window, she saw staff ushering veterans outside. Robert appeared in her doorway, waving a hand. "False alarm," he called out. "Happens twice a week." He was about to explain further when a scream split the air. "Incoming! Get down!" The words echoed through the corridor, raw with panic. The calm evacuation dissolved into chaos. Veterans dropped to the floor or bolted for exits, some frozen with terror. A crash followed, metal against tile. Robert's jaw tightened. "That's John Miller, Afghanistan vet. 3rd episode this month." He reached for his radio, but Sofia was already moving. The screams came from the men's restroom. Through the partially open door, she saw trash scattered across the floor, shards of glass glittering from a broken mirror. Inside, John's voice shifted between barked military orders and frantic pleas. "John," Robert called from a safe distance. "You're at the VA. You're safe. This isn't Afghanistan." The reply was a roar, followed by another crash. 2 security guards rushed in, hands hovering near their tasers. "Same drill as before?" one asked Robert quietly. Before Robert could answer, Sofia lowered herself onto the floor, just outside the door. She crossed her legs, ignoring the curious stares of staff and veterans gathering down the hall. Then softly, she began to hum. The tune was low and steady, a rhythm from another life she rarely spoke of. The sound threaded through the noise, like a rope tossed across a raging river. Slowly, the thrashing inside quieted. A broken voice whispered, "Who's singing?" Sofia leaned toward the door. "Just someone who knows the song," she said softly. "Someone who understands." A pause. Then quieter. "You were there." Her throat tightened. She could feel Robert's eyes on her, waiting for an explanation. "Yes," she whispered. "I was there." The hallway fell silent. Moments later, the door creaked open. John Miller stumbled out, sweat beading his forehead, confusion clouding his eyes. He looked at Sophia as if she were a lifeline. "Come with me," she said gently. He followed her into her office, where they sat for nearly 2 hours. By the time he left, calmer than he had arrived, word had already begun to spread. The rookie counselor had done what others could not. She had walked into chaos and emerged unshaken. The next morning, a line of veterans stretched down the hall outside her office door. They wanted to see the woman who had reached John with nothing more than a song. Sophia sat at her desk, her hands folded neatly on her lap, the scar at her temple catching the light. She knew the truth. It wasn't luck. It was memory. Memory she carried locked inside her, along with a small wooden box in her desk drawer, an artifact of a life she had sworn to leave behind. And for the first time, she wondered how long she could keep it hidden. By the end of her first week, Sophia Alvarez's name was on everyone's lips inside the Veterans Wellness Center. The story of how she had calmed John Miller spread quickly, each retelling more dramatic than the last. Some said she sang him back from the battlefield. Others claimed she stared him down until he surrendered. Whatever the version, the conclusion was the same. This new counselor was different. Sophia herself dismissed the rumors. She insisted she had only been lucky, that anyone else could have done the same. But Robert Keller, her supervisor, was not convinced. He stood waiting for her one morning, holding a thick manila folder under his arm. His expression mixed curiosity with concern. "Your 9 o'clock canceled," he said, handing her the file. "But I've got someone else for you. Michael Harris. Goes by Tank." Robert hesitated, choosing his words. "He's made 4 counselors request transfers in the last 6 months." Sophia's eyebrows rose as she skimmed the file. Tank had served as an Army Ranger, 3 tours in Iraq. His record listed commendations for valor alongside pages of incident reports. He had survived an IED blast, carried shrapnel in his leg, and lived with what the reports politely described as anger management difficulties. There were accounts of him flipping tables, hurling chairs, and driving one counselor to lock herself in her office until security arrived. "Why give him to me?" Sophia asked, though she already suspected the answer. Robert's weathered mouth curved into the faintest smile. "Because either you're the real deal, or you'll crash out quick. And I'd rather know which." At exactly 10 o'clock, the hallway darkened as Tank filled her doorway. 6'4", shoulders like a fortress wall, tattoos snaking down both arms. His presence was less an entrance and more an eclipse. "So you're the miracle worker," Tank said, his deep voice vibrating the air itself. Sophia gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please have a seat." But Tank didn't move toward it. Instead, he paced slowly across the room, like a predator testing its cage. His heavy boots thudded against the floor in deliberate rhythm. "I heard you got John to stop crying. Impressive. But don't think you can do the same with me." "I don't think anything yet," Sophia replied calmly. "That's what sessions are for." Tank barked a humorless laugh. "Sessions? Right. I've had plenty. Fresh out of college types, waving textbooks in my face. You probably wrote your thesis on PTSD without ever meeting someone who actually had it." Sophia tilted her head, studying him. "What makes you think I have a psychology degree?" Tank stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "Because that's what they all have. You're no different." "Tell me about your real-world experience then," Sophia said, flipping open a notepad. Tank leaned over her desk, so close she could see the fine lines around his eyes. The tension coiled in his jaw. His voice dropped to a growl. "Lady, I've been in firefights that lasted 18 hours. I've carried dying brothers through streets where every window could hide a sniper. I've killed people with my bare hands when my weapon jammed. That's my real-world experience." Then, without warning, his arm swept across her desk. Papers flew, pens scattered, and her coffee mug exploded on the floor. The smell of bitter liquid spread through the small office. Sophia didn't flinch. She didn't even glance at the shattered ceramic. Calmly, she pulled napkins from her drawer and began blotting the spill. "Feel better?" she asked, her tone conversational, almost polite. Tank froze, thrown off balance by her lack of fear. "I just..." You just wanted to see if I'd run, Sophia finished, wiping the desk. It's a reasonable test. Intimidation is a survival skill. But this isn't a battlefield, Michael. It's Tank, he snapped, though with less conviction than before. Sophia dropped the soaked napkins in the bin and looked up at him. Her eyes, steady and unblinking, held a depth that contradicted her youth. Interesting technique, she said. Very direct. Tell me, what's your body count? The question hit him like a rifle shot. His jaw tightened. What did you just ask me? Your body count, she repeated, her voice clinical. You said you've killed with your bare hands. How many? His face reddened. Nobody asks that. I just did, she replied, pen poised. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Tank's shoulders sagged. 12, he muttered. Confirmed. 12. Sophia nodded, jotting the number. I stopped counting at 15. Tank stared, disbelief etched across his face. You what? 15 confirmed, she said simply, still writing. After that, chaos made it impossible to keep track. Combat medics see plenty of action, especially in casualty evacuations. She looked up, her eyes locking onto his. Now, shall we talk about why you're really angry? Or do you want to keep playing intimidation games? For the first time, Tank's imposing figure seemed smaller. Slowly, he lowered himself into the chair opposite her desk. His shoulders hunched as though the weight of years pressed down at once. Good, Sophia said, clicking her pen again. Let's start with why you came here today. When the session ended, Tank left quieter than he had arrived. Word spread by afternoon. The rookie counselor had faced down Tank and walked away unshaken. Veterans who once scoffed now lingered near her office, curious. She was no longer just a woman who sang John Miller back from the edge. She was the one who made Tank sit down. Sophia leaned back in her chair after he left, exhaling slowly. The scar at her temple ached faintly, as it always did when memory stirred. She told herself she could keep her past buried, but she knew Tank's sharp eyes had caught something others had missed. And men like him didn't stop until they had answers. By the second week, Sophia Alvarez had gained a reputation no one at the Veterans Wellness Center had expected. Veterans who had frightened off counselors before were now showing up to her sessions, curious about the woman who never flinched, never raised her voice, and somehow asked the questions they didn't want but needed to hear. Some called her unshakable. Others whispered she had secrets buried deep behind those steady eyes. On Thursday, Robert handed her the clipboard for the weekly group therapy session. You sure about this? He asked. These gatherings can get volatile. Too many triggers in one room. Sophia nodded. I'll manage. The community room buzzed with unease as 8 veterans took their places in a circle of mismatched chairs. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting everyone in stark relief. There was John Miller, still fragile but improving. Michael Tank Harris, who had started showing up voluntarily. Emma Lewis, a Navy medic wrestling with survivor's guilt. And at the far corner, silent as stone, sat Robert Chun, a Vietnam veteran whose hollow stare seemed fixed on some battlefield decades away. Sophia took her place. Let's start with check-ins. How's everyone feeling today? John lifted his hand. His voice was stronger than it had been days earlier. I actually slept through the night yesterday. No nightmares. First time in months. Before Sophia could respond, the sharp crack of a car backfiring outside shattered the fragile calm. The transformation in Robert Chun was instant and terrifying. One moment he sat hunched and quiet. The next he was crouched low, eyes blazing with panic. Contact left, he shouted, his voice thunderous. VC in the Trillion. Get down. The room exploded into chaos. John dove behind a table, trembling. Emma pressed herself against the wall, breathing fast, fighting off her own rising panic. 2 others bolted for the door. The echo of Robert's command carried all the authority of combat, and even in this safe room, it bent the others back into old instincts. But Robert was not done. His gaze locked onto Tank, and in his fractured reality, he saw not a fellow veteran but an enemy soldier. With a roar drawn from decades of buried terror, he launched himself across the circle. Despite his age, His body moved with surprising speed. Tank stumbled back, caught off guard. "Robert, stop." The older man crashed into him, driving him to the floor, hands clawing for his throat. "You're not taking any more of my men. Not one more," he screamed, spit flying, eyes wild with rage and grief. Tank resisted, careful not to harm him, but Robert fought with the desperate strength of a man trapped inside a nightmare he couldn't escape. Tank's injured leg faltered, making it harder to push him off. Around them, the others panicked, Emma sobbing, John frozen behind the table. Sophia moved. She didn't shout. She didn't hesitate. She crossed the room with precision, her movements fluid, almost rehearsed. In one smooth motion, she slid behind Robert, wrapped her arm around his neck, and applied steady pressure to the right artery. A sleeper hold, perfectly executed. Robert thrashed, muscles straining, but only for seconds. Then his body slackened. Sophia immediately rolled him onto his side, checking his airway, her hands calm and practiced. "Tank, you all right?" she asked without looking up. Tank sat up slowly, rubbing his throat, staring at her in stunned silence. "Yeah, I'm fine. How did you?" "John," Sophia called firmly. "Give me the first aid kit. Emma, help me check for injuries." Her tone was commanding, crisp. Both responded instantly, almost as if they were soldiers again. John fetched the kit with trembling hands, steadied now by her focus. Emma knelt beside Sophia, her training taking over. "He hit his head when he went down," Sophia observed, running her fingers gently through Robert's hair until she found a cut near the scalp. "Emma, apply pressure while I get the bandage." By the time security stormed in, the scene looked less like a violent breakdown and more like a coordinated medical response. Sophia taped gauze over the wound, her hands steady as stone. "What happened here?" demanded Officer Peterson, the lead guard, scanning the room. His gaze dropped to Robert, unconscious on the floor. "This man's dangerous during episodes. Last time, it took 3 of us and a taser to restrain him." "He wasn't dangerous," Sophia replied softly, her eyes still on her patient. "He was terrified. There's a difference." Peterson frowned. "Where'd you learn a sleeper hold like that? Military precision." Sophia didn't blink. "YouTube. Amazing what you can learn online." But Tank was watching her differently now. He had seen her movements, fluid, exact, without hesitation. That wasn't something you learned from videos. That was muscle memory, honed under fire. When Robert began to stir, his eyes fluttering open, Sophia's voice softened again. "You're safe, Robert. You're at the center. You had a flashback, but you're okay." Relief swept through the group. Emma's breathing slowed. John peeked out from behind the table. Even Tank exhaled deeply, though his eyes never left Sophia. Later, as the paramedics wheeled Robert out, Tank lingered near the door. When the others left, he stepped close, lowering his voice. "YouTube, huh?" he muttered. Sophia met his gaze evenly. "That's right." He leaned closer, his voice quiet but sharp. "I've seen men move like that. In the field. Under fire. Not in classrooms, not on YouTube." His stare drilled into hers. "Who are you really, Sofia Alvarez?" For the first time since her arrival, she felt the carefully constructed mask slip, just for a heartbeat. Memories flickered, smoke, screams, the sharp sting of shrapnel. She shoved it back into place, with a practiced smile. "I'm someone who wants to help," she said simply. But Tank wasn't fooled. And as whispers spread through the building about what had happened in group therapy, more people began to wonder the same thing. Who exactly was Sofia Alvarez? The parking garage beneath the wellness center was nearly empty that evening. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows against the concrete walls. Sofia Alvarez walked quickly, clutching her keys, hoping to avoid the stares and whispered questions that had followed her all day since the group session. The events replayed in her mind, Robert Chun's breakdown, her own response, the way she had moved without thought. Too many had seen. Too many were asking. Her footsteps echoed sharply until another set joined them. Heavy, deliberate. "Going somewhere, Doc?" The voice stopped her cold. She turned to see Michael Tank Harris emerge from behind a pillar, his massive frame filling the space between her and the exit. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried the same intensity as when he had first stood in her office. "It's late, Michael," she said carefully. "We can talk tomorrow during your session." "It's Tank," he corrected automatically, then shook his head. "And no, we can't. Tomorrow you'll just give me more of that YouTube nonsense. I need the truth now." He stepped closer, not with the swagger of intimidation, but with the precise caution of a man who had once done reconnaissance in hostile territory. Sophia tightened her grip on her keys, the metal edges pressing into her palm. "What kind of questions have you been asking?" she asked. "The kind nobody can answer," Tank said, voice low. "Like why there's no record of you at the universities you supposedly attended. Why your employment history before this job is basically empty. Why someone who's barely been here 2 weeks knows exactly how to handle combat veterans in the middle of psychotic breaks." The garage seemed to close in, the air heavy with unspoken truths. "I don't know what you're implying," she said. Tank cut her off. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Nobody moves like you did with Robert without training. Nobody puts a man down in 4 seconds flat and checks vitals like it's second nature unless they've done it for real. And nobody talks about body counts like they're grocery lists unless they've been there." Sophia tried to step past him, but Tank shifted smoothly, blocking her path. Not threatening, just unyielding. "Let me pass, Michael." "Not until you tell me the truth," Tank said, his voice carrying something desperate beneath the steel. "Do you have any idea what it's like, sitting across from someone who actually understands? For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I wasn't alone. But if it's all an act, if you're just another therapist pretending—" His hands clenched at his sides. His voice cracked. "Then you're no different than the rest." Sophia's throat tightened. "It wasn't an act," she said quietly. Tank's eyes searched hers, doubtful, aching. Then he reached forward, not roughly, but firmly, taking her wrist. His thumb brushed across her skin. Sophia froze as his fingers passed over the raised, ridged scars hidden beneath her sleeve. His breath caught. "Jesus," he whispered. "These are shrapnel scars." Sophia tried to pull back, but his grip only tightened, gentle but insistent. His eyes flicked to her neckline, where makeup couldn't fully conceal another scar near her hairline. His voice dropped to a near command. "Show me." "Michael, please." "Show me," he repeated, his tone carrying the weight of a former commander demanding honesty from his own soldier. For a long moment she stood frozen, torn between the safety of her constructed identity and the raw truth, clawing to be free. But when she looked into Tank's eyes, she didn't see suspicion anymore. She saw hope, the desperate hope of a drowning man who believed he'd found someone who could throw him a rope. With trembling hands, Sophia walked to her car. She opened the trunk and pulled out a small wooden box hidden beneath a spare tire. The box was scarred, its brass hinges tarnished, the wood burned in places like it had survived a war of its own. Tank watched in silence as she placed it on the hood of her car and unlocked it with a key that hung on a chain around her neck. Inside, metals gleamed against faded velvet. 5 purple hearts, a bronze star, a silver star, a combat medic badge worn from years of service. Tank's eyes widened as she picked one up, turning it slowly in her palm. "Helmand Province," she said, her voice low, steady. 3 tours as a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne. First medal, roadside bomb took out our convoy. I spent 6 hours pulling soldiers out of burning vehicles under sniper fire. She set it down and touched another. Second, mortar strike on our aid station. Kept working through the collapse. Third, from a firefight that lasted 14 hours. 19 trips across open ground under fire to evacuate the wounded. 19 I saved. 23 I didn't. Tank swallowed hard. She touched the 4th. Suicide bomber in a marketplace. The 5th an IED. I was in the lead truck. Traumatic brain injury. Burns. Shrapnel. The words hung heavy in the garage. Tank finally found his voice. "Why hide it? Why pretend?" "Because I didn't want to be the veteran counselor," Sophia whispered. "I wanted to be a counselor who happened to be a veteran. I wanted to help without being defined by the uniform. And because every time I remember, All I see are the faces I couldn't save. Tank's eyes softened with understanding. Survivor's guilt. Sophia nodded. Her eyes brimmed, but she held them back. I came home, and they didn't. I got a second chance, and they're still buried in the sand. Tank stepped closer, his suspicion replaced by respect, by kinship. Then stop hiding. Let people see who you really are. You've been carrying this alone for too long. For the first time in years, Sophia allowed her shoulders to sag. The mask she had worn since her discharge cracked. And standing there in the dim light of the parking garage, two soldiers who had fought different wars but carried the same scars found themselves no longer alone. By Monday morning, the entire wellness center was buzzing. Sophia Alvarez felt the weight of every glance as she walked the halls. Conversations hushed when she passed, then resumed in whispers. Some veterans nodded with new respect. Others studied her carefully, as though reevaluating who she really was. Word of her confrontation with Tank, and of the medals he had seen, had spread like fire through dry grass. The first real consequence arrived when she opened her office door and found someone waiting. Dr. Patricia Hayes, Chief of Mental Health Services, sat behind her desk as though it belonged to her. A thick folder lay open in front of her, Sophia's personnel file. Miss Alvarez, Patricia said without looking up. Or should I say Staff Sergeant Alvarez? Please sit. Sophia remained standing, her posture instinctively rigid. This isn't a court-martial, Patricia said, though your record reads like it could be. She tapped the folder. Bronze Star, Silver Star, 5 Purple Hearts. A combat medic career most people wouldn't survive. Impressive. And yet, she closed the file with a snap. None of it on your employment application. That omission is a violation of federal guidelines. Sophia's stomach tightened. I wanted my qualifications to speak for themselves, not my service record. A noble sentiment, Patricia said, but technically grounds for termination. Before Sophia could respond, the door opened again. A man in a tailored suit entered, followed by a woman with a microphone and a cameraman hauling equipment. The man smiled like a politician. Staff Sergeant Alvarez, he said, extending his hand. Richard Bowman, Director of Public Affairs. This is Jennifer Clark from Channel 7 News. We'd like to feature your story in an awareness campaign. A decorated combat medic who became a healer, perfect. Sophia did not take his hand. And if I refuse? Patricia's eyes hardened. Then we'll be forced to revisit your employment status. It was a threat wrapped in professional language. Sophia felt a familiar tightening in her chest. The same feeling she had known pinned under fire. No way out. After they left, she sat staring at the small wooden box on her shelf, its metals glinting in the dim light. They had become a burden again, heavy with the ghosts of soldiers she could not save. A knock broke her thoughts. Emma Lewis peeked in. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that, Sophia said. Emma, if someone you trusted had lied about who they were, would you forgive them? Emma thought for a moment. Depends. Were they lying to hurt me? Or to protect themselves? To protect themselves, Sophia admitted. Then I'd want the truth, Emma said simply. All of it. After that, forgiveness depends on who they are now, not who they were then. Before Sophia could respond, more figures crowded into the office. Tank John, even Robert with a fresh bandage on his head. Others followed, veterans she had counseled over the past 2 weeks. Their faces carried determination. We heard, Tank said, about the interview, about them threatening your job. John stepped forward, his voice steadier than she had ever heard it. We also heard about your record. 5 Purple Hearts. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to help you heal, Sophia said softly, not compare scars. Robert's gravelly voice cut through. You didn't tell us because you were protecting us. Same way you protected those 19 soldiers you dragged out of hell. He met her eyes, clearer now than they had been in years. You think we can't handle knowing our counselor is carrying her own ghosts? You're wrong. Tank's voice grew rough with emotion. You think we care about resumes? You're the only one who makes us feel like we're not broken. That matters more than medals. One by one, the others echoed him. Emma, with tears bright in her eyes. John, his shoulders squared with new strength. Even Robert, who had nearly choked Tank days earlier, spoke of how Sophia had treated him with dignity when fear ruled his mind. "You saved us," Emma whispered. "Not because of your record, because you understand." The room swelled with agreement. Sophia's chest ached with something she hadn't felt since the battlefield, the unshakable support of a unit. Later that afternoon, the so-called interview began in the conference room. The VA brass sat stiff in their chairs, the news crew ready with lights and cameras. But when the doors opened, it wasn't just Sophia who walked in. A flood of veterans followed, filling every corner of the room. Tank stood at her side. John, Emma, Robert, all present, their presence louder than any protest. "This is irregular," Patricia protested. "Nothing irregular about protecting one of our own," Tank growled. Then Robert Keller, her supervisor, entered carrying files. He placed them on the table. "Before this circus continues, let's look at results. Since Sophia arrived, suicide attempts at this center have dropped 40%. Treatment compliance has risen 60%. Transfers to other facilities have nearly vanished." He glanced at the camera. "Those are the numbers that matter." Veterans spoke next. John told the story of his first full night's sleep in months. Emma spoke of how Sophia's empathy pulled her back from despair. Tank declared that she treated them like soldiers, not patients, and that was why they trusted her. The reporters shifted uncomfortably. This was not the polished human interest piece they had wanted. It was raw, messy, real. Finally, Sophia stood. "If you want coverage, fine. But the story isn't me. It's the veterans. Any publicity must focus on their recovery and expand funding for the methods that work. Otherwise, I'm out." The silence that followed was heavy. Patricia looked around, cornered. Richard Bowman's smile faltered. Jennifer Clark lowered her microphone. 6 months later, Sophia's office was larger, its walls covered not with medals, but with photographs, weddings, graduations, reunions, all sent by veterans she had helped. Tank now served as her unofficial assistant, using his presence to welcome new arrivals. John was studying counseling. Emma ran a support group for women. Robert mentored younger vets. The medals still sat in their box, but no longer hidden. They were surrounded now by thank you cards and children's drawings. Sophia looked at them one evening, listening to Tank laugh, with a new patient in the waiting room. For the first time since her discharge, she understood. She hadn't left the service. She had simply found a new battlefield. And in this battle, victory was measured not in lives lost, but in lives reclaimed.